Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years.
With the wheel off and the vehicle on jack stands and supported, you need to punch out the part where the axle nut has been staked into the axle. This way the axle nut can be removed. There's no cotter pin. It's actually, once it's installed, it's been peened in or staked. So I need to take another punch and work it underneath. All right, I'm gonna spray some rust penetrant on the end of the axle. I'm gonna use a 30 millimeter 12-point deep socket to remove this axle nut. And you're gonna wanna have an assistant step on the brake and then use a really long breaker bar to break this free. I've broken it free with the breaker bar. I'm gonna use a ratchet to bring it the rest of the way off. And I'll just leave it threaded on there for now. I'm gonna disconnect the sway bar link from the strut. Then we can lay the sway bar link over to the side. We'll disconnect the tie rod end with the ball joint and pull it off the knuckle. That way I can turn the knuckle freely, push the axle out of the back of the knuckle, move the axle out in this direction, and then work on freeing it from the transmission and the bearing mount that's here on the side of the engine. And once those are released, you should be able to pull the axle straight out of the engine compartment. Let's spray some rust penetrant on this upper sway bar mount. Use a wire brush to clean off some of the rusty bits. These can be difficult to take off. They get rusty, and then the ball joint spins. It does have a hex spot here to put in a 6mm hex drive. A lot of times that strips almost instantly as soon as you try to break it free, and you end up having to put vice grips behind to grab onto the ball joint because there's no point here for a wrench. We're gonna do our best to get this one off without having to cut it off. So this is a 17mm nut. Try to break it free first. See, it's turning. It's turning the whole ball joint with it. It's really tight. Trying to clean out any rust and dirt that's in this hex drive so I can get the hex drive to sit as far possible inside here so it doesn't strip. Use some brake parts cleaner. I've sprayed some oil in there, and I've been working the hex drive in to try to clean it out. And I can see it's going in a little deeper. Try to get this to sit as best I can. I think that's as far as it will go. Spray some more rust penetrant on there. I'm gonna try to counterhold this with the hex drive while I free it with the 17mm box wrench. We'll see how this goes. Sometimes you have to brace that against like the strut. And these just have so much. Let's see, it's moving. That's good. It's really tight though, so I'm just gonna put that there. I'm gonna spray some more rust penetrant. These are typically self-locking nuts, so they're a little bit, they're not perfectly round, they're kind of oblong, and that can make removing them difficult. and also the rust gets gummed up in the threads. So I'm trying to spin this on and off to try to work the rust penetrant into the threads. So as I kind of expected, working these back and forth, this hex drive, they basically always strip. It's nearly impossible to remove them without these stripping, no matter what you do. So the next step, I'm going to get some vice grips and try to hold the ball joint back here and use a 17mm socket and ratchet and continue to remove this nut. I'm going to try to slide these locking pliers behind the ball joint on the sway bar link. Got a 17mm deep socket on this longer ratchet. I'm going to try to remove these. It feels like it's turning. One thing to mention, if you're going to have to remove sway bar links for any reason, or think you're going to have to remove them for any reason, you should have new ones on hand. They're almost a one-time use part, but we carry them on 1aauto.com. And if you're as lucky as us, you'll have to resort to power tools or a hacksaw to cut these sway bar links free. I'm going to do my best to avoid the strut. I don't want to damage that. I just want to kind of cut on the, I'm going to try to find the narrowest part of the ball joint in the sway bar link. I think I'm on there. Need to separate the outer tie rod end with the ball joint from the knuckle. There's a cotter pin and a castle nut. I'm going to spray some rust penetrant in here. Take some needle nose pliers. Bend the cotter pin over so it's straight. You can use side cutting pliers to get a better grip on it. Try to pry it out. Try not to squeeze too hard. You don't want to cut the cotter pin if you don't have to. It's easier to remove it in one piece. There we go. I'm going to use a 17mm box wrench. Break the castle nut free. If it doesn't want to budge, take a dead blow mallet, tap the end of the wrench. Just going to put that nut just on the end. Can hit right here in the knuckle with a metal hammer to try to free this ball joint from here. You do run the risk of cracking this knuckle and damaging it. It's preferred to use a ball joint separator tool. So I'm just going to slide that in, thread it down, use the appropriate size wrench for the tool. I'm going to keep threading it, and this will separate the ball joint by pressing it out. They have a taper, and basically it's press fit. When you tighten in the nut, it presses into the knuckle. That's what holds it in place. It needs to be pressed out. That one is free. Remove the nut. Just work that out. Might have to move the knuckle a little bit. Just place that aside. This way I've got more room to move the knuckle to get the axle out. I'm going to spray some rust penetrant into the splines here to help this slide out. going to use a plastic dead blow hammer to free it from the knuckle, the axle. So now it's moving nice and free. I can take the axle nut off. So now that I know that this axle will move free from inside the hub, I'm just going to put the axle nut back on for now. Just a couple threads to keep it from falling out potentially, because we need to go underneath and loosen these ball joint, the two nuts and the bolt, and pull the knuckle and strut assembly away from this lower arm and help us get the CD axle out. We can separate the ball joint from the lower control arm by removing these nuts and this bolt here. You don't have to mess with the ball joint that's in the knuckle. I'm gonna spray a little bit of rust penetrant on these. Just using the rag so it doesn't drip everywhere. This one has threads on the top side. These are 17 millimeter, so I'm using a 17 millimeter socket, a breaker bar and an extension. Put these bolts aside so I can reuse them. I'm gonna grab the lower control arm and I'll push up on the suspension arm a little bit. Get them to separate. Might need to use a pry bar. That's why I put the nut on the axle shaft so it didn't slide completely out on me. I'm going to take the nut off of the axle, pull the axle out of the hub, and I can place that aside. Now we're under the car. There is a axle bearing carrier that is bolted to the back of the engine block that our passenger side CV axle is going through. So there's a bearing inside here, and then it goes out and into the transmission. Need to spray some rust penetrant in here and remove this big locking ring, and then remove this locking bolt, and this should slide out of this carrier and come out of the transmission. We'll have a drain pan ready to catch any fluid that comes out of here, but that should do it. Let's put some rust penetrant up in here. You can either use a large flat-bladed screwdriver. I'm using a big pry bar, try to push it free. Use some slip jaw pliers, try to squeeze these together. This upper part of the snap ring is kind of rusted and seized into the groove. I'm gonna take a ball peen hammer and try to tap it free. Back to the slip jaw pliers. Try to basically free it from the groove that it's in. If this snap ring comes out without a problem, the next step would be to remove this 14 millimeter bolt. Once this is removed, you can pull the axle out of the transmission and slide it through this bearing pedestal. Ours has rusted in place. I'm going to end up removing this entire bearing pedestal at once in one piece and putting it on the bench and working the snap ring out. Remove the 14 millimeter bolt on the bottom. Separate this from the engine block. It's got some locating studs on it. I'm just prying them off of it. So there's only two on the top. I've got this bracket loose. Now I need to get out of the transmission, get a drain pan ready to catch any fluid that's going to leak. Try to pry. I'm gonna take a block of wood and the dead blow mallet. Try to knock this out of here. This axle is pretty long and it's got some weight to it. Be very careful when removing it. Pull it straight out of the transmission. Okay. Yeah, feed it out of the car. We have it. If you don't live in a Rust Belt state, you might be able to have skipped this step. This snap ring should just pop right out, and then you can pull the axle out in the car without removing this bearing pedestal. I had to take the entire bearing pedestal off of the engine block and take the whole axle out as one piece because this snap ring has rusted in place. I'm going to take a pick and I'm just going to try to scrape some of the rust and junk out of the slot, and hopefully that will free it up, and spray rust penetrant in there and just work it out. If I bend up the snap ring, I'm not too concerned. I can put it on a flat surface. It's just basic metal and I will hammer it back flat. But I want to clear out any garbage. It was really hard to get up in here with this in the car, so I'm working on it on the bench. Got the snap ring out of the groove. This should slide down, but it has kind of seized. Instead of putting this in the shop press, I'm going to try to put it on our vise here and use it as a place to brace it, and then I'm going to hit here and try to push this through. If this doesn't work, then I'll go to the shop press, but a lot of people don't have presses at home. They may have a vise though, so you can use the vise. Try to make this work. So I'm going to start with a dead blow. Just hit it. Now I'm going to try the metal sledge. Let's spray some rust penetrant in here. Maybe we'll get some of it to get between the bearing and this bearing pedestal, which is the metal outer piece that it mounts to. Hopefully that will help it separate. Get it set up in our press the best I can. It's kind of an awkward shape. Just going to carefully try to press it out. Yeah, it's moving. Go. After a few tries with the press, we eventually got it to separate. Here's our old axle assembly we removed from our vehicle, our brand new one from 1AAuto.com. There's no core on these. They're ready to go. Put it right into your car. It's similar design, has the ABS ring, comes with a new axle nut, comes with a new bearing already on here, dust shield, all the splines. I'm going to clean up this bearing carrier that we pressed off. I'll put it onto the new one. I'll clean up this snap ring, flatten it out again, reinstall it. Then this will be ready to go back in the car and get you back on the road. I'm going to clean up this bearing pedestal in a parts washer, get a lot of the gunk out of it. Wire brush. Just gonna take some emery cloth and finish cleaning out the inside of this. Just cleaning out the groove as best I can where the snap ring goes. And I'll take some brake parts cleaner and just wipe it out. Try and get the snap ring off that I bent up. Use a small pry bar, pop it up and over this. Ball peen hammer. There's our snap ring. Use this flat part of the vise and a ball peen hammer. Try to flatten this out. Take some white grease and just put it around the bearing surface just to help it slide back in to that bearing pedestal. I'll put some white grease on these ears on the snap ring. Try to pop it over this. See if I can take the ball peen hammer and just pop it down and over. Perfect. That can sit there just like that for now. I've put white grease around our bearing to help it slide in. This can only go one way because there's a big thick lip on this side. Just kind of might flip this up. And we'll try to get this to seat down evenly. Taps. The bearing is into this bearing pedestal far enough that the groove is exposed, and I'm going to attempt to put the snap ring into it now. Take some slip joint pliers. So those clip together. I'll take a punch, and push it into the groove, and push that one into the groove. Sort of pops out, but there isn't too much tension on this. I'm just going to take this long punch, go around, push it in, make sure that this has seated in the groove. Hasn't quite seated down here. I can take our punch, tap it in. I'm going to reinstall the 14mm bolt that's holding the bearing in place to keep it from spinning. This just keeps the outer race of the bearing from spinning inside of this pedestal. Tighten it down. So this is installed now. And we can reinstall the axle to the car. Our axle assembly needs to go through the wheel well and into the engine compartment. Readjust this. Be very careful of the seal in the transmission. Don't nick it. These splines are gonna go into the transmission. You can spin the axle a little bit to make it slide in. Be very careful of the seal that you don't damage it. If you've got the axle bearing the pedestal out, this bracket is the bearing pedestal. If you've got that out, Make sure that when you go to put it on that it fits over these two little locating dowels on the top part. There's not one on the bottom, but you might get hung up in those when you're trying to put the axle in. So I'm going to try to line it up with the transmission first. So line this up. I've got it pretty well lined up. I've got the transmission spline started. I'm going to take a rubber mallet. I'm going to take the old axle nut and just thread it over the new axle. This will just give me a little bit wider of a spot to hit and also prevent me from damaging the threads. There we go. There it is. I just had to get them to pop onto the dowels by just flexing them a bit. That's located where it needs to be. This is where it needs to be. Now I can put the bolts back in that hold this bearing pedestal in. Install the two upper bolts. Make sure you start these by hand because they're going into aluminum. I'm going to tighten these bolts. Just be careful tightening these. They are going into the aluminum engine block and they are steel bolts. Do not want to break them or break the engine block. I'm going to push our knuckle and strut assembly out, turn this over, and then feed it through the hub assembly. I have to turn it a little bit, line it up with the splines. Got our axle nut here handy. Thread that on, hold it in place. I'm going to grab on the lower control arm and push up and feed this up and in. Also have to go up and over the axle a little bit. I just had to push in on the axle to make sure it was all the way in. Capture these lower nuts. And then I will come back and torque them. I'll reinstall the tie rod end. Tap it into place. I'll reinstall the castle nut. Torque all of our bolts and ball joints to spec and replace the cotter pin. Replace our cotter pin with a new one. You can also take a small ball peen hammer, bend it over, and the same for this one. I torque these lower ball joint nuts, 55 foot-pounds. I've actually gone in here, because these sway bar links get seized on here so easily, I went in and cut the boot away, the rubber boot, so that I can get locking pliers in here, get a better grip on it. And it's kind of working. By holding it, I'm able to turn the nut out. Worst case, if I get it loose enough and it just keeps spinning, then I will take a saw and cut it right here. But I'm gonna keep trying it right now with the locking pliers. Got it. That's awesome. Here are our old sway bar links from our vehicle. You can see where I had to cut them. I was able to finally get this one out, but still these have been destroyed by trying to remove them. And you can see they're kind of rounded here. There's no real way to counter hold them to remove the bolts. They are supposed to have a hex drive in here. That strips out pretty quickly when you're trying to remove them. Here's a brand new sway bar link. This is from oneauto.com. These actually have 6-point on them, so you can put a wrench on here and tighten them down and it's not going to spin on you. And when you want to remove them to do other services, you can put your wrench over here and spin this off without destroying the ball joint and the sway bar link. So this should fit great and work great in your vehicle. Put these up, get this one up top. You can bend these around, slide it through. These nuts are locking nuts. The hole is not perfectly round, it's kind of oblong. So when this starts to tighten, it will lock and it won't want to back off. These nuts are 18 millimeter. I'll get this one set up here. The counter hold on the back is 18 millimeters. Use a deep socket, 18 millimeter in the front. Get these snug down and I'll come back and torque them. Torque for these sway bar links is 55 foot-pounds. And repeat it for the other nut. With someone holding the brake for you, torque the axle nut to 217 foot-pounds. We need to stake this axle nut into this groove. If the groove's not facing up, you can just turn it so you can see it. Take a punch and a ball peen hammer, gonna line it right up in the middle of that and stake that metal down in there. This is instead of a cotter pin, it keeps the axle nut from spinning off. If the rotor's gotten real greasy from you touching it and working in here, just take some brake parts cleaner before you drive the car and wipe it down.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at 1AAuto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.